Uh-oh. Whoops, what'd I just do? Ah, I have so many windows open here. I'm trying not to shut
Hey,
something
Nick,
down.
do you think it's a good time to pull out the cup, or should I wait for a while? Do you think the boys are on live right off the bat, or should I hold off on the cup? To when? Like when will it be an active time to pull that out?
Oh, and we're live. All right there, Grandpa Swimbait. So it looks like we're live.
You're gonna go with Grandpa. Look, dude, I took the glasses off. I am not
All
Grandpa.
right.
Fireside story time chat with Grandpa Swimbait.
Hey man, so it's good to see you. It's been a while. I don't remember the last time. The last time I saw you was what, the Forcewood Cup? Has it been that long? Forcewood Cup?
I think it's been that long. Yeah, the
Forcewood Cup. Yeah, that's crazy. So we've got like 10 minutes here before we get started. But so back in your trophy case behind you, it looks like Nick has sort of secreted away one of the BV swim baits. But you reached back there and you pulled out a couple of what you would call them war horses, like some pieces of history.
Oh, these are called the War Eagle. These are War Eagles.
Bring them back out again. Bring them back out again, because those things are like museum pieces.
Okay, well these are the original Worm Kings right here. These are the old school circa 1993 to 99, 2000.
Yeah,
we were chucking the big oversized sassy type Worm King, and you can see that it has the big hook on. We were taking these dogs and we were throwing these things where they were stalking the trout, and they were just basically, to your point, a lingcod bait or a halibut bait, or
that's exactly bass. What that is.
You know, sand bass, calico bass, white sea bass. That's what you throw these things. But they started coming up with these trout patterns, and it was the closest thing to a trout pattern. If you can see, it has a little bit of pink and green in it. I'm not sure if the color is coming through on the thing.
A little bit.
But yes, the fish had never seen anything like this at San Vicente and Otay and all the San Diego lakes and Casitas, Castaic. I mean, this was cool, man, because these original old school with a big, just galvanized hook, a big old giant saltwater head on there, no eyeballs, and then we got kind of funky, actually put eyeballs on some of them, and then I know before we started airing, is anybody watching this? Are we actually?
Oh yeah. We got people kind of paying attention. Yeah,
people going in on this.
This is the bonus. This is the bonus stuff right here. This is what happens when you show up early. You get to see stuff like this.
These are the original bass tricks from
Look at those things.
1999, 2000, and in 2001, dude. I won Clear Lake, and you can see where I stitched the baits back together in desperation, because I only had a small bucket of these things, and most of them didn't run right. They were hand pours. So a lot of them ran off to the side this way and this way, but the ones that were running right, and this was at Clear Lake when I won by 10 pounds. It was the first BASS that I won on a swim bait in 2001. I mean, dude, I was stitching them back together. You can see the stitching in there. I was using line and thread to stitch them back together, because the bass were mauling them. They knocked the eyes out of this one. I mean, dude, they knocked the eyes out of it.
That's insane.
And this
wow. What? How many fish do you think you caught with those two baits right there? Give me a wild ass guess.
Oh gosh, there's no telling. I mean, in a 4 to 8 pound range, you know, and which was Clear Lake, which all that was 4 to 8 pounders. I lost every big fish I hooked that tournament, and I still had 85 pounds. I had 15 fish for 85 pounds in 3 days. And Skeet Reese was second, and he had 75 pounds. But I beat Skeet by that was when we were kids. 2001. Skeet got second. I got first. I won by 10 pounds, and he had 75 pounds. I had 85 pounds, and these were the secret dogs. There's no telling how many fish I caught on these two baits right here, because I would stitch them
exactly?
Together and throw them back.
What did you stitch them together with? What's the stitching there? Is that line? Is it thread? What is it?
Thread. This one is really cool because it's actually got it's threaded back together. It's got, like, I was using some kind of like really heavy duty, probably waterproof thread.
That's crazy.
But I'll show this one to you. I'll probably take this to some of the shows I'm gonna do. Like, I'm doing the Anglers Marine Show. Yeah. You know what it was? It was dental floss. It was dental floss, because that was the stuff. I'm looking at it. It's just now coming back to me, and you can see right there. I don't know if you can see that. It's real white, and it feels like dental floss. It was dental floss, because I figured dental floss wouldn't unlike thread, it wouldn't rot, right?
Yeah.
And dental floss, and I was sewing it back together. And then this one, I just used some real heavy duty line to sew that one back together. I think I probably did that on the water. I was desperate. Wow. The fish had ripped it so badly they shredded the side of it, and they shredded the top. These two old school bass tricks were the two guys that helped me win the 2001 Bassmaster Invitational out there by 8 with 83 pounds. That record still holds, by the way. I guess they told me the other day that that's still a record
I did a little research this morning trying to find out just exactly where that record stands. As far as I can tell, that is still the 3-day BASS record. Of course, I mean the TTBC came along a few years ago and kind of changed all that, but that record still stands for bass for 3-day total. That whole thing. Go pick up the first ones you had first. The trout imitations, the halibut baits, real quick. Okay, so these came from your experience working on a saltwater boat, correct? That's kind of where you got that. I mean, run us through again where that idea comes from.
Well, what happened was there was me and a core group of guys that were. I was deckhanding. I was a deckhand on some of the party boats out there. I was fishing. I started off being a deadhead. Before I became a deckhand, a deadhead's a guy that goes out there and fishes on the party boats, and he's on the DL. He's the crew's favorite because he's going to give the jackpot to him. If you win the jackpot, you give it to the crew. And they give you hamburgers, and they give you drinks, and they give you all the best bait. And so, I take some of these old school baits out there, and then they give me a brown bait or some of the best anchovies or sardines to toss out there. But I was a saltwater rat running up and down Southern California fishing, and so there was a core group of guys that started going to these lakes. We were also ate up with bass fishing, but we would take these baits, and this was a hot thing on the days that they were stocking those trout. Those bass wouldn't touch anything that the traditional bass fisherman had to throw. I mean, there weren't even super spooks back then. And if there were super spooks, they were still too small. But even then, there was no such thing as a super spook. And I don't know if people can remember back when super spooks were considered too big.
Yeah.
People freaked out at the size of a super spook.
Isn't that crazy?
Now we're into this. Now we're into this realm. I mean, it blows you away.
Oh yeah.
But guys thought super spooks were too big, and we were throwing these things here and just killing them the days they stocked trout. And so we'd run around to Castilla, Casitas, San Diego lakes, and just have a field day. And they looked at us like freaks because we'd bring our saltwater rods out there, our yellowtail rods or our sand bass calico rods, Penn squitters, and our 7.5 rod. No level line. You just sit there with your hand. You're level lining with your thumb, throwing these big fish, but you're wrecking these giant bass. On these old Penn reels with these baits tied to them.
We can see here that people are starting to check in. We've got somebody from the Nature Coast in Florida checking in from the Gulf, so we've got some Gulf rats out there, so they're probably appreciating this whole deal. How big is that bait in your right hand? How big is that bait?
It's right at it's an 8-inch, and that's why I think I matched. What we were doing was we were matching the hatch for the 8-inch stock trout, because back then the Department of Fish and Game in California, they were stocking 8-inch trout, and boy, that was a mistake. Because they were getting mowed, but this was a dead-on ringer for it. And they went bigger. Funny enough, they went to 10 and 12-inch trout to stock. They let them live a little bit longer in the nurseries and hatcheries because they realized these were just bass candy.
Yep.
And they were getting mowed. And nobody thought back in the day, I'm sure, that a 8-inch trout was an easy prey. And boy, once you start putting them in these lakes and these baskets, turned on to them, now we all know that it's a given. But again, back in the 90s, this was too big to fish for any kind of a bass unless you were crazy and you were a saltwater guy and you knew that they would kill it. But this is a dead match for the 8-inch trout that we used to throw. I mean,
how much had you fished in those reservoirs you're talking about prior to figuring this out? Was this something that you had chased these fish around for years prior before you sorted out, hey, wait a second, let's try this particular bait?
Oh, I was just as naive as everybody else. I used to fish those reservoirs. I've been fishing those reservoirs since I was a kid with my dad.
Okay.
And I've been fishing those lakes, and I was the traditional bass fisherman. When I go there with my drop shots. So not even drop shot. Back then it was called split shotting. And there was no drop shotting.
Split shotting.
Split shot a reaper. I'm taking you back, right? But you would split shotting a reaper, or any other little, or a ringworm, or a power worm. Oh my gosh! If you were split shotting a power worm, you were going to wreck them. And then some of the bass, just the crank baits and spinner baits and all the traditional baits. And I left all these at home. And it wasn't until, the trout were getting dropped in there. You were seeing the trout get blown up. You throw all your stuff at them, you wouldn't catch it. You might see another guy down there throwing something bigger and catching a few. And you're like, oh, wait a minute, I got tons of that. So there was just, I knew of some of these guys, but I didn't know any of them. But at the same time, we all knew each other as we were getting into it, and we're all saltwater guys. And the word got out. It was like a hush hush word that, hey, there's a secret bite going on, that these baits of ours, these yellowtail calico sand bass baits of ours, will wreck big largemouth on these trout stocking lakes. And that's where it all started. It really did. It wasn't just me. I didn't have the epiphany, but at the same time, there was a core group of us that suddenly decided to venture into the world of throwing big, giant baits at these bass and blowing people's minds, including ourselves.
really it's sort of kind of changed the landscape of big bass. I mean, truly trophy giant bass fishing. I mean, I think possibly. I mean, it's been the kind of the change bait. I think that you know, up until we had like these giant spoons and so forth that people fish on like Kentucky Lake. But that creation and evolution of this particular bait, the swim bait, and we'll get into like the glide baits and so forth, is one that it's funny. I did some research this morning looking back to try to pinpoint like exactly the first public reference to you and swim baits and so forth. And I went back a long ways and I couldn't find it. But I saw a piece back in 2000. Get this, in 2000, where you were referring to fishing these baits in the winter as the new frontier. So it's amazing how this stuff has advanced in like the past, especially like the past 10 years, but I'd say the past 15 years, it's gone from, as you pointed out, just a handful of guys, you know, trying something out brand new to look at what we're at now. I mean, look at this.
Yeah.
Stuff. It's insane.
Yeah. Now it's crazy what it's developed into. And actually, it was the 90s that I was pulling it off secretly. I started fishing in tournaments in the 90s before Clear Lake came out. Mm-hmm. Cool little history about what happened. I would have to, you know, it's pro draw. Everything back then was pro draw. So you're always competing against another guy at the pro level. There was no shared weight. There was no amateur in the back of your boat.
Right.
So I had to decoy these. You know, I would catch one of these fish, you know, on these big, I'd throw these big swim baits out there. I'd catch a big bass, and I had to pretend as though it was the first time I'd ever got bit on it. Gosh, I can't believe he ate it. And you did. You had a bait.
Yeah.
So, I mean, late 90s, these were my go-to baits to catch. You know, I won Don Pedro on this bait. I won Folsom on this bait. And these are long before Clear Lake. I got second at Orville.
Yeah.
But I either got first or second at Orville. I was racking up these victories on these motherlode lakes, you know, and I'd integrate a lot of swim bait fishing, but every time I did, I never had a camera on me because it wasn't a national event. I didn't have a camera on me, and I didn't have a media people following me. You know, and it wasn't until Clear Lake that the media was on me that they actually saw this. And it was the cat was out of the bag at Clear Lake. But until then, I had a good run of about 5 years. I'd say 95 to 2001 that I just had the swim bait bite kind of from a tournament level to myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
There were a lot of guys that were just going there when they were stocking trout to these lakes and just picking off, you know, quietly picking off these big studs, you know, at these trout stocking lakes. But to run around to Orville and Don Pedro and Folsom and Clear Lake and everywhere else and throw swim baits, me and maybe two other guys, Dave Rush was one of them. I remember Dave Rush, just a few names I can remember that you know, I'd be shocked to look in their rod locker and see a big bait tied on, and they knew, but you know, we were all trying to still incorporate it when it counted.
Absolutely.
I mean, it was time back then, dude, because nobody had them in their boats. Nobody.
So I see that the folks are signing the pile on. We have Birmingham, Alabama. We have the northern neck of Virginia. We have Northern California. We have the Pacific Northwest folks of Michigan. So we have a little bit of mix of folks ready. And Byron, let's do one thing real quick here. Hold up those two stitched together pieces again real quick for those who didn't quite get to see those two. Those are the coolest things I've seen in a long time.
And it's because they're right here, right? They're in the trophy case. They're hanging.
They're in the trophy case. Easy grab right there. Yeah.
Let's go back up in this corner over here. Anyway, these are the original bass tricks that are stitched up. I mean, I was stitching them in desperation, but these two baits were what helped me win. And I only had a few of them that helped me win the 2001 Clear Lake Invitational and set that record that still holds up today. It's 85.3 or 83.5. I don't remember which, but I know I beat Skeet by 10 pounds. So the second place guy was Skeet, and that was one time. That one. But,
not a chance, brother, on that one, buddy.
These two dudes are stitched up, and you can see the stitching still in them. And the eyes are knocked out of this one. I mean, the head has been pulverized. If I could show you guys, I mean, the whole head of this thing feels like Velcro. It's got so many teeth marks in it. This one right here is fuzzy. The head is fuzzy from as many bass, as many teeth marks chewed up this head and chewed that eye out of that bait. And still, I was stitching it together desperately with fishing line, and this one with dental floss. This one has dental floss stitching in it, so it held a lot better because the dental floss really did a good job. But these are like Frankenstein baits.
That's unbelievable. Those are super cool. Yeah. Well, so that should give you a little bit of a clue to the lead in what we're going to talk about here tonight. So Byron, we did a piece about a week ago, posted to the Livingston Lures webpage entitled something along the lines of Byron Velvick's guide to catching swim bait giants in the fall. And we had a chance to show a handful of details. I mean, we got some good information out, but there's a lot more to it than just the stuff that we got into on that particular piece. So our plan for the next 45 minutes to an hour or so is to kind of explore in a little more detail, a little more depth, the use of swim baits, both soft plastics and hard baits like the glide baits, the Bee Venom and the Bee Viper and so forth, and really kind of give people a little bit of a guide on how, when, where, and more importantly, why you should be throwing baits like this time of year. I mean, I'm excited about it. It's I had a lot of questions for you at the time when we were talking about it to get into them, but it's something that I know you've done it for as long as you've thrown those baits. Kind of walk us through your history of doing this stuff in the cooler weather months versus spring and summer when the tournament season usually runs.
That it's a neat time of year because the fish a lot of times get active on juvenile bass, if you will. Not even bass. I just remember some of my greatest the moments when I was very young that I had this epiphany of how big a bait these fish would annihilate was, and I was a kid, man. I was really young. This is going back to when I was, 16, 17, 18, 19, even younger than that maybe, but going to Lake Forest, and we would see these bass chasing in the fall, especially chasing smaller schools of bass around the lake and getting them up on seawalls and blowing them up. And it was insane because we're talking 7, 8, 10, 12-inch largemouth that were just bait for these studs. Yeah. And it was a lake with a lot of cannibalism going on because there was such a large amount of small fish in these little lakes around Southern California where I grew up. It woke me up even at a young age to how these fish will blow away something bigger than at the time was a super spook, not even a super spook. I mean, super spooks came out and everybody thought they were saltwater spooks. They didn't realize that bass would even eat that. And you look at a super spook now and it's nothing to you. But back in the 80s and 90s, back in the 80s and 90s, it was like, oh my God, that thing's the size of that's too big. And yet the bass, they were just clobbering it. And in the fall, to get back to your point, this is not an oversized meal for a bass in the fall. They're attacking bass like this, and they're attacking trout, and they're attacking the hitch at in the Clear Lake area wherever they have the indigenous hitch. A lot of the herring and whatnot, and these elongated bodies. The Venom is the elongated body. The Viper is the wider body. Yep. This is the Viper body, and all I'm doing here is just match the hatch. I'm gonna throw a gizzard shad bait, a brim, a crappie, whatever. But in the fall, when the water cools down, these fish get super aggressive again. Man, they just go nuts to stock up and eat big. And rather than go eat a ton of shad, these bigger bass know that one good bite, one good meal is going to last them. Help them get that the big girth on them they want for the winter. Because just like everything else, they're going to be kind of hibernating, and they're going to slow down for the winter. Their metabolism is going to drop down. They're going to get real lethargic. So that, all the fish go on that big gorging thing in the fall, and that's where I think a lot of times we as anglers miss. Because they're on shad. They're in the backs of pockets, and they're on big schools of shad on the shad die-off. But there's a whole other generation of fish that are picking off the fish that are feeding on those shad, and that's where the big swim baits came in for me. Every fall, I could get into a really good bite with big bass on swim baits. At all different water column levels. Just knowing what species was foraging on the shad and what the big bass were chasing. That was the key.
Let's break that part into 3 parts and real quickly here. Let's talk about water temperature, water clarity, because this time of year when you start to get rain and it gets kind of mucky there, and also just how those two influence the movement and the presence of bait fish. And we could probably throw the wind in there as well, because that's another kind of a major influencer this time of year, because weather turns, gets windy, gets rainy. So let's break those apart a little bit. So you're out there and for a fact that water is getting cooler. It's cooling down by the day. Also, the chance that it's going to get murky. So kind of give us some detail on the things that we should look specifically for if we're going to go ahead and throw these baits.
Well, if you're going to throw a swim bait, here's the do nots. I'll give you the list of do nots, and you brought up so many good ones right there. If it's overcast and rainy, I don't throw them. I have a hard time throwing them. Be on a super strong swim bait bite, and the reason is, even though, and these are making noise. The cool thing about the Livingston Venom and Viper, this is going to be a new thing for me, even because this is the first one I've ever had that actually makes a sound. It has the multi-touch system in. You can change the sound. Before that, let's pretend that these baits don't exist, which they do now. But before that, there was never a sound coming out of a swim bait. There was nothing coming out of a swim bait. It was just a visual bait. Well, now when you throw a swim bait out there, you're reeling it along, and it's overcast and rainy. You don't see the bait until it gets to the tip of your rod. You can't see it 2 feet out, 3 feet out, 6 feet out, 10 feet out. You can't see it. Well, if you can't see it, the bass can't see it. Sure, they got a lateral line, and they might pick it up, But right off the bat, even if the water's gin clear, if it's overcast, for me, in all my years of swimbait fishing, my percentages are really going to go down. I mean, if it's a topwater bait, that's a whole other creature. You know, if I'm throwing a bait, if I take all the balls out of this, and again, cool thing about these baits, I can pull all the balls out of this thing and make this a floating bait and work it up on top, then it's a big topwater bait. Then this is just a giant, it's like some of these lunker pluckers and these, you know, black dog lunker plucker, these other baits that pride themselves on being the biggest topwater baits out there. Well, this is the biggest topwater bait out there too. When you pull all the balls out, and then you're making a disturbance. The fish can pick up that disturbance. Right. Then a cloudy water situation is good. As far as water clarity, to your point there, if it's raining, I don't throw it. If it's overcast, I don't like to throw it. If the water gets muddy, I'm not a big fan of throwing them because, again, it's a visual bait. New frontier with the Livingstons, they make sound, so who knows how much better these might be in overcast conditions. And again, dirty water is always tough on a swim bait. It's just, that's when your square bills come in, your lipless baits, rattling baits, big thumper spinner baits. You're in dirty water situations. So I think that swim baits really are handicapped by that. Best conditions, clear water, or even a moderately clear water, or a good amount of visibility. Wind is great if it's a good amount of wind, a breeze, anything. When it's dead slick calm, it's difficult for me to throw swim baits when it's dead slick calm. I've had some good days on it, but they have to be killing shit, out of their excuse my language. They have to be killing stuff out of their head on days that it's dead slick calm and you still catch them on swim baits. So I like sunny, breezy days for swim baits.
All right. So let's then analyze where, because kind of the point of this whole thing is for us to find, and we put the word giants out there. Not everybody has giants in their particular fishery, but let's just say the biggest baddest that you've got in your pond, whatever it happens to be. Maybe it's only a 4-pounder, maybe it's a 12-pounder, but where in most fisheries, and let's just say lakes and reservoirs first, would you typically expect to go to start your hunt? Let's go ahead and just pretend we're hunting today. Where are we going to go first? What's the first place we should go and why?
Rick Clunn taught me something years ago, and he was a mentor to me, and he showed me something that blew my mind years and years ago, that he was, long before the internet and computers and all that stuff, he was just keeping notes and scores of all these tournaments he fished. And Clunn showed me something which just absolutely blew my mind, was that he goes, look at October. Let's just say October. And it was the month of October. He goes, let's look at October. And he pointed out that in October, in all of his years of fishing, in all of his research, all of the major victories, or darn near all the major victories, were won in the backs of creeks, back of pockets, back of washes. Everything was in the back of something. He showed me the most mind-blowing fact in fishing. It's almost like the Holy Grail when Rick Clunn secretly shows you all these notes he has and says, take a look at this. October, he goes, find a main lake offshore wind. Find one. And those are the things that tell you, to get to your point, that's the kind of stuff you realize life is moving to the backs of the pockets, backs of the creeks. Everything's going back. I mean, this is the fall push, These fish are schooling, and they're starting to push those schools back to the back to pin them up, and the water temperature back there is either cooling or warming faster, whichever it might be, whatever attracts them, depending on the weather you're having, the weather system you're having, whether it's cooling or warming faster, depending on the fronts and all that. But most of the life is there. So to answer your point, and what I've always done, in the fall, I start at least about halfway back, middle of a bay, back of a bay, start hitting secondary points, and I check the backs of everything first. I don't spend a lot of time on the main lake in the fall. It just doesn't make sense. I'll go to big washes, if it's more washes and big tributaries, but the back of things, that's where the life is at. And the big fish are going to follow the small fish. You're throwing a bigger bait, so you might not be fishing right in the middle of all the small fish. You just back off a little bit and try to analyze, or in your mind put out that, I'm throwing a baby bass. I'm not fishing the food chain, the number one thing in the food chain. Well, let's say the number one thing in the food chain is the shad. Then this guy's in position trying to eat those shad. And then the fish we're looking for are not really focused on that. They're focused on these guys being a little bit distracted. And that's what you get a lot of. And I know a lot of guys that are watching this right now have had this experience. When you hook a fish, you hook a bass 10, 11, 12 inches, 13 inches, and you're reeling him in. And right about the time you get him to the boat, you see one following him that's a giant. That's your swim bait. That is it right there. That is the moment that you take that little 12-inch bass or 10-inch bass or 8-inch bass off your hook and you throw this thing. You fire that back out there. You change your whole day. And I remember clearly at Clear Lake, which was funny, back before there were swim baits, we would go there in the fall and fish tournaments. And I can't tell you how many tournaments, the big fish in the tournament that was weighed in was actually caught by a guy that hooked a small fish, was reeling it in, and a bass ate it, and that's how they caught it. This isn't one. More than I can remember. Guys are like, dude, you won't believe how Jimmy over there won big bass. You know, he had that 10-pounder. I'm like, yeah, well, how'd Jimmy catch that 10-pounder? Oh, he hooked a 9-incher. He was reeling a 9-incher, and the 10-pounder ate the 9-incher, and he was able to get the 10-pounder in. Is that crazy?
That's the the animal kingdom at work for you there, my friend. Yeah.
What's that?
That's the animal kingdom at work for you there, my friend.
And this is what kills me though. It's like, why? That's when a swim bait guy goes, oh my gosh, put down everything that's going to catch a 9-inch bass and throw something that looks like a 9-inch bass. I mean, that's the duh thing, you know. You're like, throw something that matches the hatch for the big fish, which is a viper or a venom. I mean, don't be afraid to throw that bait right there.
Let's continue on this whole thing of paying attention to conditions. Now, one point that you made to me when we were writing that piece was the attentive guy tends to do better this time of year. Basically, paying attention to details like you're talking about with the water temperatures and so forth. How about the movement of birds? You've got a great story about finding fish and winning a tournament based upon birds flying around. Extrapolate on that a little bit.
Yeah, that was a great tournament. That was in Arizona at San Carlos, and I won that tournament. It was to your point, you know, looking for bait, looking for birds, and it was the blue herons. It was those herons, you know, and those big herons like to squawk at you. When you pull into a pocket, they usually squawk at you and they fly away and they fly over your head, and you know they're mad because you're in their bait bucket. I mean, you brought your bass boat, you pulled into the bait bucket. And they were busy, you know, working together, trying to pick off some shad or whatnot. And it was at San Carlos that I pulled into this area, and these heron jumped up and squawked at me, but they just flew to the nearest point and set back down. And then it was almost as if they were fighting me for the area. And this is a great sign, man. This is one of those moments where you're like, I learned a lot, because every time I would move through that area and I got close to those heron, they would jump up and squawk at me, but they didn't fly over the hill and eat for another pocket. They didn't fly across the lake. I mean, they stayed there, and they were fighting me for that place. And I told my partner at the time, I said, man, I go, there's got to be something real special about this, because those birds are acting very territorial. So we're going to work this through, and we catch a couple and then slow down, and we catch a couple more. But I stayed there the whole day, and so did those blue heron. And I won the tournament there because they showed me that there was such a good concentration of bait in that particular pocket. And unlike the birds, and that's just knowing that the birds are acting a little differently in that spot on that lake than they do. And most of the times I see them, and if I'm going down the lake and I see heron, I pull over there real quick. I mean, that's a key thing. When you're opened up in the morning and you're wide open and you're looking for everything, you know, I look for a little breeze. I look for where the breeze is blowing into pockets. I might change pockets. I might change sides of the lake because the wind changed. So I'm running down the lake in the morning, and I might have been catching them on the east side of the lake, and now all of a sudden the wind changes, coming out of the east, blowing to the west. So I might start fishing western pockets, you know, exclusively. But then all of a sudden, if I start seeing heron on the bank or heron on points, I'm going to stop and see how committed that heron is to that spot.
So we have a pretty good question here for a gentleman who's been patiently waiting here. Michael Moore wants a little bit of advice on scents if you're going to use swim baits. Not necessarily on this subject, but while we're talking about nature and so forth, what are your thoughts about scents?
As guys have seen on the Clear, if anybody watched that Clear Lake event where I won, I was putting hot sauce, smearing hot sauce all over there, and it's a scent. You know, it's a lubricant, if you will, and it does create a scent. I love to put scents on swim baits, and there's a reason. Even on the hard baits, even on the vipers and venoms, I like to add something to them, because a lot of times you get these fish that tuck up, and we all talk about followers. All the guys talk about followers all the time, and there's a couple ways to convert a follower into a strike. And I believe one of them is if you're patient and you put scent, and I don't spray it, because I want something jelly. I want something I can smear on it that's going to stay on there for a while. It's going to be like a paste. Gotcha. And that's why I was using it. I'm sponsored by Hot Sauce. I don't even know if they make hot sauce anymore. It's Edge Products Hot Sauce. But what it was it was the stuff I used in 2000. It was the stuff I used again in 2011 when I won both times at Clear Lake, and I've used it a lot since then and all around before that. And since the 90s actually, and I was sliding it. I was just buttering the toast, I called it, where I just smeared it all over and smeared it all over.
Yeah.
And it does two things. It's not just the scent. Also, if you touch it, it's a lot slimier. It's a lot more slippery. Yeah. So what happens when the fish bites it? I think you get better hook penetration. First, they're going to hit it harder because it smells like a bait fish. And again, scent. No, I'm sure you don't want to go with like some kind of a game fish sound or a bait fish sound, or if they call it a wild shad. I don't know how important that is, other than the fact that it's lubricant. It's like a jelly. It's going to make the bait a lot better for hook penetration, hook sets, and at the same time, it's going to stimulate the fish's whatever it's called, or the nose, the fish's nose.
There
fish's
you go.
nostril.
Let's just go straight to the nose. Yeah.
Well, there's an aura factor. What is that thing?
It's olfactory. I got you. I got you covered. Olfactory. I got it. So what is the base of that scent though? Was that a cross? I mean, so are you saying you should go like craw base if you can't find hot sauce? If you just want a good kind of just is it a craw? Is it a
I go a brim, whatever they call a brim or a shad. I mean, I if it really does smell like a crawfish, these things don't smell like crawfish. But then again, I don't know how important the actual smell is. I'm more interested in being something that stays on there for a long time. You know, I make a lot of casts, and I can still see it hanging on my bait. I still see some of the yellowish of it or whatever color it is. I want it to stay on that bait. I want to go as many casts as I can without having to reapply it. And at the same time, if I can get a bluegill brim, shad, shiner, anything at all that they name it. But I like the big gel stick kind that you rub on. I mean, I think that's the key. If you're just spraying stuff on there, aerosol stuff on there, it's not going to last for long, in my opinion. I think it's not going to hold up.
You're correct. Yep. Let's a quick reminder here. So we have a sale running for tonight until midnight only. This, I mean, typically during these Livingston Lives, we've been able to extend sales for 2 days, but this is a get it done fast deal because it's after midnight tonight. You will no longer get this. It's 30% off BV swim baits. So go to the Livingston webpage, go to livingstonlures.com and click 30% off. Can you believe that? That's a crazy price. 30% off. There's a reason why it's a short deal.
It's like $10 a bait, isn't it?
Yeah, something like that. Yep. 30% off.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's a great deal. You're never going to get these cheaper. I pretty much guarantee you're never going to get
right here.
The code to enter at checkout is BVSWIM. BVSWIM. It's 30% off, and this is only until midnight tonight. That's the B Viper 6-inch, the B Viper 8-inch, the B Venom 6-inch, and the B Venom 8-inch. While you're there, go take a look at the color palette of these baits, choose your favorite, and go post your favorite color on the YouTube live feed, and go post your favorite color on the Facebook live feed, and we'll choose 4 winners, 2 from each feed, who will win a swim bait and a hat. All you have to do to qualify for that is when you're looking for your Viper and Venom to get 30% off, choose a color and go post it on one of the 2 live feeds, and you're automatically in. Byron, let's go back to some details here. There is a fairly specific window that you choose to fish these baits in the fall. When you go out in the morning, you know that you're going to fish them during a certain window. Define that window and why you do not want to fish outside the window if you can.
It's called, you don't want to fish outside the window because it's the school of hard knocks. I have lived and died with swim baits. I have been the home run hitter. I've been the 0 to hero, and I have been the hero that went straight to 0, because it is not like throwing a drop shot or a Hideki rig or just a Cinco. You know, you read a lot of these stories about how to fish these different baits, and you go out there and guys pick it up. It takes time to really get into a good swim bait bite, and all the stars have to line up a lot of times for the days to be just right when the fish decide to go complete cannibal carnivore and start attacking other fish. You know, they're always gonna hit a little drop shot bait. They're always gonna hit a little Cinco. They're always gonna hit a little soft plastic, or and guys learn a lot of things very quickly. Much harder to learn about swim baits. And the thing I've learned right off the bat is mornings and evenings are prime time. You know, and in tournaments, my program is, if I'm in a tournament, I'll fish a swim bait in the morning, hardcore, man. I'm fishing a lot of swim baits, first thing in the morning. This last time I won Clear Lake, just this last year, 2 years ago when I won Clear Lake, that bite was happening till the sun hit the water. My glory was till the sun hit the water, and it went pretty cold until about 2 in the afternoon. And then from 2 o'clock until weigh-in, it fired up again. And there were locals that were coming out at 2 or 3 o'clock that gave me some room, but they knew these were swim bait gurus, swim bait studs that lived around Clear Lake that were simply going out for the afternoon bite. And to that point, if you want to learn how to fish swim baits, especially in the fall, mornings and evenings, but put that thing down about 9 or 10 o'clock and go get yourself a limit. Fish for those big bites up until about 9 or 10. Put the swim baits away, because I've had a really hard time having a great bite on swim bait fishing between 9 and 2 o'clock. Now, I know there's probably a lot of guys out there watching right now that have wrecked them at noon, 1 o'clock. And there are probably some great fisheries and great exceptions to what I'm saying. But for me, for all the years I've been doing it since the 90s, it's really, my thing is really to realize the weakness of it between about 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock. And right before weigh-in, I mean, it gets ugly at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, whatever time your weigh-in is. So try to get your limit, catch a couple of big bites early if you're lucky. Try to figure out where you might get a big bite. Catch your 5 fish, and then at about, when you got 5 in the well and you only got 10, 11 pounds, 12 pounds, whatever, and you need that kicker, pick that swimbait back up around 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, and fish it till weigh-in. And that's tournament swimbait fishing. But now if you just want to go learn it, man, fish it in the morning and then go out from 2 o'clock until dark. And those are clear, sunny days with a breeze on the water. When the water temperature is cooling down, again, I like water temperature is really not relevant. I know you talked about that earlier. And if smallmouth could be a whole different temperature, largemouth depending on what part of the country you live on. I can't even give you a dead number on it because swimming fishing in Florida and swimming fishing in Minnesota are two completely different things. But those fish have an activity band, a band where they just get active, and so I don't like to pigeonhole anybody by telling them what water temperature they should be fishing at because that's just not fair.
Not at all. You know what? Let's while we're on that subject, we're going to kind of transition here to choosing your swim baits, because you mentioned the words that you don't want to pigeonhole, and there's no such thing as like a kind of a broad-based definitive answer that's going to satisfy everybody, and that's the truth. Let's talk about colors, shall we? Because this is the one point that you made in this piece that we're referring to, where you said I'm not going to mention a color because whatever color that I'm fishing here is not going to be applicable at all, because your point when you're fishing swim baits is you're trying very hard to mimic the prey, the forage that's in the particular lake, correct?
Exactly. Yeah, and that's where saying a color, you have to identify what particular species of fish those bigger fish are eating. You can do the traditional baby bass, you can do the traditional trout, but then you get up into like Shasta and a lot of those places in California, and they get on these kokanee salmon and these really silvery looking, silvery with a pronounced white belly. The kokanee salmon have this very strong white belly, a pearl-esque belly with a silver side. That's a different creature, and then you get the blueback herring. And how do the blueback herring look at these different fisheries where they have the herring? Then you get into the golden shiner. And is it the natural golden shiner, the native golden shiner in Florida, or is it the farm raised? The farm raised one, Scott Martin taught me a lot about the color of golden shiners and how the wild shiner is so much different looking color wise and so many different attributes than a farm raised shiner. And that's where you talking to the bait stores, talking to live bait fishermen, looking for floating fish on the surface, catching a bass if you're lucky with something in its throat, get it out of its throat, see if you can figure out what it was and what color it was before it got mangled and mutilated. This last tournament at Gunnersville, that first day at Gunnersville, when I got second, of course, Skeet Reese, won it, and we know all the story there. But there were big gizzard shad floating on the surface with teeth marks in them. I'm in these key areas, and there were a lot of other boats there, and I don't know how many guys paid attention to this, but I took the gizzard shad out of the water, stuck in my live well, went back to the house and showed Murray and Skeet the shad. I showed them the baits. I said, look what I found floating, over there in Seabolt Creek, and look at the size of these things, and showed them the teeth marks in them. And I was really interested in looking at the color of them, seeing exactly how much gold was in them and how much silver was in them, and looking at my swim baits and coming up with the right swim baits that matched that hatch. And that's where I want to, perch up north, shiners in Florida.
Yep.
It's really knowing what those fish are keying on and matching that perch or that shiner.
Let's go ahead and dive then into the choosing of swim baits, and we're not going to just talk about these baits, although we will definitely talk about these big ones. Let's start small and work our way up. Basically, you have to fish the correct bait for your fishery. Is that a safe declaration?
Yeah, you got to fish the bait that year. It's more than just the bait for the fishery. I'll tell you what it is. This is the coolest thing, and I've got two great stories about that. I go to Clark's Hill, I go to some of these tournaments back east, and there's a lot of guys that fish live blueback herring. They have blueback herring tanks. They sell blueback herring, and you can go to those tackle stores and ask the guy that's at the tackle store. Every morning, the best guides are coming in, and these are guys that live on these lakes, like Clark's Hill, for instance, and a lot of lakes over there, and they're buying a certain size blueback herring, and every year it changes. Sometimes they want, and the store owner will tell you, this year they want the biggest ones I have in my bait bucket. The next year, they want the smallest one I have in my bait bucket or somewhere in between. And he goes, and I can't keep this one certain size. Well, that's the size swim bait you want to throw. If the guy tells you, man, I'm selling out of 8-inch blueback herring, then you better start throwing an 8-inch blueback herring swim bait. But if the guy says, oh, I got a bunch of those, and I got a bunch of these, but I'll tell you what, every time I get a 3-inch blueback herring in here, you know, the 3 best guides on the lake come here and buy all the 3-inch blueback herring I have, that's the year I'm going to throw a 3-inch swim bait, blueback herring style. And then what that tells you is these guides, these people that live on these lakes, they know that year what size forage they're on. And another great story I have from Ken Huddleston is, Ken Huddleston told me a story about this. When they changed stopping trout in the California lakes, when they got off of an 8-inch trout and they went to 10 and 12-inch trout,
yep.
Ken told me a story of how fast it changed as far as this bait became a dead soldier on those lakes. You go back to where you had been wrecking them a month or two ago, and it was as if the fish had Wi-Fi or really good internet, and they put the word out real quick. Hey, note to everybody, fishing game just switched to 10 or 12-inch trout. Do not touch anything at 8 inches, because suddenly an 8-inch trout didn't exist in those lakes, or very few of them existed. But the dump was happening at 10 or 12 inches. He says, you can't catch a fish on my original Huddleston. But now you throw a 10 or 12-inch Huddleston, you're going to start wrecking them, and that how key size has to be. So you need to figure out what those bass or what those large bass are feeding on, and it's not a static size. So it's real important to have 6-inch baits in there. It's real important to have 8-inch baits in there. It's real important to have small ones, real small swim baits in there. And I mix it up. I have a huge collection of swim baits for that reason. And I carry a lot with me in my truck when I fish tournaments and go around for that reason, so that I have a big run of baits to match that hatch when an indicator goes off. Whether it's a bait store, whether it's what the guides are using, whether it's a fish throws up or has floating in the water. Those size and color are key.
Let's talk a little bit then about the different functionalities of the 2 baits that we've discussed. We have the Venom and the Viper. Two very, I mean, look at the shapes of the bodies. Significantly different. I mean, you can't even compare the two. They're significantly different. Let's talk about the functionality of each. You mentioned in the piece that we had mentioned earlier that this particular bait has a specific function for bait fish imitation than this one does. So let's run through the big one first. If you're fishing this, what is your forage that you're fishing this in?
That's going to be the gizzard shad, obviously, any kind of a crappie, bluegill. That's the difference with the Venom and the Viper. With the Vipers, you're throwing, and I know a lot of guys still struggle. They're like, was it Venom, Viper? Venom is elongated. Venom is the elongated one. That's the Venom. Venom elongated. The Viper is the gizzard shad, the bluegill, the crappie, anything. Tilapia. Tilapia is a big one. We have a lot of
juvenile bass.
No, juvenile bass is not. Juvenile bass for me is.
Longer.
Juvenile bass. No, juvenile bass is going to be the Venom. The Viper is that wider bait, and that's where a lot of the gizzard shad come in and everything else. And so it's not just gizzard shad. Like I said, it's tilapia. It's any panfish. Really, if you think about it, the sunfish, bluegill, crappie, panfish thing, warmouth bass, all that stuff. Just something a little bit fatter and bigger. And so that's the we had to have both. If you're doing swim baits, you talk about matching the hatch. You talk about, and trout fishermen are so good at this, and I don't understand why bass fishermen were not. I mean, trout fishermen, you hear them talking about how those fly fishermen, you talk about the strands of every thread of that fly and how the fly has to have just a certain look to it. And bass are no different when it comes to these fish they're eating. Guys are not realizing that these big baits have to really look like exactly what they're dialed on, or else you're really not going to get nearly as many bites as the guy that really dials these things in. So having a good arsenal and a good color, a good group of colors of Vipers and Venoms, you got 2 completely different baits here. So that's the Vipers. With the Venoms, blueback herring, blueback herring, baby bass, like I said, the kokanee salmon, the California hitch, any of the trout, obviously. That any of that herring stuff. Shiners, go back to this. We were talking about shiners, but that's a shiner bait. It's a wider, big, fat shiner. So that's more the hitch and the shiner and everything else with the Viper. And the Venom, it's interesting. I've always been more comfortable. I heard one swim bait guy one time tell me that this is an easier bait for the fish to digest. People have asked me which one gets more bites, and I've always been more of a narrow guy. I've caught more fish by a long shot on anything like even, going back to these. That's an elongated body. A fish taking a shot at a tilapia or a big shiner, or a big shad, that's a harder bait for them to swallow.
Right.
Both bait. And if they can't regurgitate it, they can actually die. I'm sure a lot of guys watching have seen bass floating on the surface with a big bluegill stuck in their mouth. I know at Amistad, we've seen a lot of them with big tilapia stuck in their mouth. And they're floating on the surface because a 5 or 6 pounder took a shot at a pretty good sized tilapia, got it stuck in his mouth, couldn't throw it out because the spines couldn't reverse. And once they suck it in, they can't get that thing reversed because the spines are holding it in. They can't get it all the way down, so they choke to death. And that's an easier thing for them to swallow. So if a guy asks me if you said, hey, which style do you prefer? I prefer the long narrow baits. And a real smart swimming guy told me that fish are there's less chance of mortality of dying if you eat this versus eat that big bait. And it's an interesting point. It's worth thinking about. Just food for thought.
So before we transition to another subject, let's throw out a quick reminder there that for tonight only until midnight, you have 30% off the BV swim baits. That's the Viper 6, the Viper 8, the Venom 6, and the Venom 8. I don't really know, what 30% extrapolates to, but it's a steal of a deal. But it's only good until midnight tonight, Byron. We've had these deals that we've extended for 2 days and 3 days and sometimes even 5 days. But this is like a one-time only deal because frankly, it's almost too good of a deal. It's such a good deal. I can't.
$10 off. It's $10 off each bait, which is unheard of. You'll never see that. You'll never see these baits that inexpensive again. But for $10 off, I don't know how much we've talked about the baits, but it's one bait that I've thrown everything I can possibly imagine throwing into a hard bait, a hard glide bait into one, from being able to change the level of what depth you want to fish with the ball. I think guys by now probably learned everything about these baits and what they have in them. But obviously it has sound, but you can turn the sound off. You can change the sound of the baits. You can change the depth that they run from shallow to deep. You can add. There's guys I know that are taking all the lead out of them now and putting tungsten balls in there. Some of my buddies are wrecking them on this thing, and they're the bait comes apart. So you de-pin the bait, and when you take the center pin out of it, it's a jointed bait. You can now sit there and take that and pull those balls out. And here's the balls. You can take the balls out that I have here, drop the balls out, and guys are shoving tungsten balls in there. They're actually making this bait way heavier than we can even make it with lead. We're using lead. That's how expensive it would be to throw this thing with tungsten in it. But these guys are telling me, dude, you put some tungsten balls in there, get that thing down there. Nobody has a glide bait that's going 25, 30, 35 foot and still working. Doesn't exist. Glide baits across the market are 10 feet or shallower. This is a 20 to 30 foot glide bait if you want to fish super deep glide. In there doing that and making that noise, kicking off that sound, or maybe not even making noise at all. If you just want to shut it off with multi-touch, that's your call.
Keep that thought in mind here while I remind people again. It's www.livingstonlures.com. Go to the product pages for the B Viper and the B Venom baits. When you check out, you'll enter the code BVSWIM. That's BVSWIM. You'll get 30% off, and it's good until midnight tonight only. While you're there, take a look at your color palette and choose your favorite color. Post it on the YouTube live feed. Post it on the Facebook live feed, and you'll qualify to win a swim bait and a hat. We're going to give away 4 combinations: a swim bait and a hat. So we're just blowing the doors open tonight. Byron, we haven't had a chance to talk a heck of a lot about the swim action. Now, this is the one thing that it's impossible to communicate just exactly how cool these things are. But once you throw them in the water, I want you to do your very best. Do your best to describe to me the swim action of both of these baits, the Viper and the Venom.
Yeah, that is hard because describing it, let me tell you how many models we had to go through, because it took a year and a half of going back and forth with the manufacturer to get the action right on these things. And glide baits, I didn't realize how hard it is and how perfect things have to be within grams. We're talking grams for these things to have that action where they swim. They literally glide more than the length of their body before they kick back. I mean, some of the glides were like this. I'll break down a couple things real quick. Anything more than a single joint, to me, is not natural. Guys are talking about the double joint, triple joint, the triple, I won't say the names, but there's a lot of baits out there that have double, triple joints. The problem you have with that is you have what I call a worm effect. I mean, it doesn't even look real. It looks good in the water, but it's doing this, and it doesn't even look like it has a backbone. I mean, you lose the vertebrate of the fish. You lose the backbone of the fish, and you get like these baits where the head stays static and the whole body wiggles. And I've never seen a fish swim like that my entire life. I mean, it looks like a tadpole. I mean, you know the tadpole, how a big tadpole, like a bullfrog tadpole, is just a head with a tail that does this. Well, that's not real natural. What you want is a glide bait. You have these glide baits that are going like this, and they kick back. Kind of like a guy talks about how they want a crankbait to go hunt. You guys always talk about, hey, does that crankbait hunt? Which means it runs, but it kicks off a little bit. It kicks off a little bit. It kicks off a little bit.
Yep.
These fish now want something that kicks off a little bit and comes back. It kicks off a little bit. So glide baits, and there are some really good ones out there. Most of them come from Japan. They're very expensive. They're hard to get. You know, again, we know the names of all those too. You know, they sell for eBay for $200, $300, you know, a piece or more. And that's what I wanted in this bait. I wanted a $300 glide bait as far as the action. I wanted a bait that literally went long distance and then came back, and went long distance and came back, and had that ability to give a big glide, a big natural glide. And there were so many weaker ones. And we bought a lot of baits. The guys over there at Livingston and myself, we bought a lot of baits. And we ordered a lot of baits online, and to look at the glide baits that were out there. And I said, this is not good. This is not good. This is marginal. This is really good. These are the best. You know, let's emulate the most expensive and the very best swim baits that are out there, which people can't get their hands on. And so we're selling basically the action of a $200 or $300 glide bait from Japan built into this thing. But now it has sound in it. You can change the weight chamber in it. You got all the colors in there. You got a big wider color, and it's. Well, now with tonight's special, you get $10 off, so the thing's going to cost hardly. Well, you could buy 3 of these or 4 of these for one Japanese bait.
We've got a really good question here about line weight and how and if that actually changes the distance of the glide or the slide, and also let's get into the way that you actually work these baits, because I think that's one little piece of information the most people who are not familiar with baits, especially baits of this size, are just a little bit murky on. When you're throwing these baits, how dramatic is the action that you're putting into it? Kind of run us through the actual physical part of making these baits work right.
You know, there's a couple schools of thought. I've actually fished with some guys, and there are certain guys that like to twitch a glide. They like to glide, but they can't just stand the action of a straight glide, which is just throw the thing out there. These baits are so strong in their action that you can throw them out there, count them down a little bit. I like to pop them a little bit because, you know, I actually like to, I burp them. I call them burping it because, you know, they got that chamber right there. If you can see that chamber right there, they got that chamber where the balls are in. So you might catch some air in there. So when it hits the water, I like to try to get all the air out of it. So I'll pop it a few times when it hits the water to get it down. But then as you start to reel it, you can feel, and this is how we know these are working the way I wanted them to when we were playing with all the prototypes, is the rod just, you know, you feel the rod do this. And that's the glide. I mean, you feel the glide through the rod. As it goes and it kicks and it turns, you can feel the action of that bait through the rod. That's not a straight retrieve. But now you get these guys that like to pop them and twitch them a little bit. And some guys like to really pop them hard and get them to turn around themselves. And that's really cool when you get these things to do the 180. And they're coming along gliding. And then all of a sudden you pop it and it turns around. And literally, if there's a fish following it, it looks back at the fish. I call it remember the old movie Red October with Sean Connery? You know, the Hunt for Red October.
I remember that, yep.
And it was called Crazy Ivan. Remember the Crazy Ivan, where the submarine turns around to see if it's being followed? Mm-hmm. I remember that. I go, this is a Crazy Ivan technique. Where you're throwing that glide bait, and as it's getting close to the boat, if you pop the rod just right and you flip that thing around, just like Sean Connery on Hunt for Red October, that thing turns around and looks back in the direction it was swimming. And I mean, if there's a fish following it, and this little dude turns around and stares him down, I've had some incredible experiences turning the bait around and then watching the fish lose it. The big fish, the follower, lose its mind when all of a sudden it turned back around on it.
We've got a really good kind of a basics question here, and we're going to have you kind of spool through this in kind of quickly, because we've gone through swim bait setups, but let's be particular about these oversized baits, because the point made here is that they're not necessarily natural for most people to cast. I mean, this is a 6.5 ounce bait. I mean, this is a heavy bait. It's not necessarily natural for most people to cast those. So let's run through the mechanics of the rod, the reel, the line. I mean, all the things that help you fish these things effectively. Let's start with the big ones first and work our way down.
Okay. One of the first thing I'll tell a guy is, you're not going to cast this thing like a traditional. This is more of a lob. I mean, your cast is going to be a side arm. It's more of a saltwater. If you did saltwater fishing, this is a traditional cast in saltwater. But you're kind of doing a launch with it. You know, you're holding that rod back, you're going to use a bigger reel. If you have a bigger reel, you want to use monofilament, or if you're fishing deep, you're going to do fluorocarbon, but you don't want to use braid, because if you get a backlash, it cuts itself and you're going to lose your bait. I mean, I don't throw braid on swim baits ever. I just don't throw braid on swim baits, period. I don't like it. I don't like the way it works. I don't like the way it handles. I don't like how unforgiving it is on a big, heavy cast. If you do got a backlash coming and you got a big mono, a lot of times it'll kick itself out. It'll pop itself out. But you want to be able to sit there and fire that thing out there and cast it so that it's a sidearm cast. It's way out there. It's holding on to the rod at the base of the handle and using your arm as a leverage and just popping it out there. And when you swim it, when you swim it, you want to throw a monofilament on the shallower ones and a fluorocarbon when you're fishing them deeper. But casting, it takes some work. I mean, and there are certain rods. The rod will dictate everything. My swimbait rod that I use with duck fishing, the Byron Velvick Signature Series one, a lot of these blanks load up properly. So when you go to cast it, it loads up and it's forgiving as far as casting. It doesn't really torque on you. If you got too heavy a rod, it's really going to wear your body out. Your shoulders and your arms are going to feel it. And a real good swimbait rod, and there are certain blanks. There are certain blanks that are perfect for that, and that's where it took me a lot of years to figure that out too. But if you have the right blank, your casting is effortless. As you load up on it, the rod does most of the work. It's kind of like pole vaulting. You know, you see the pole vaulters, how they lean back and they shoot out? You pole vault that bait out there, basically. You're leading in and you're pulling that thing out there, and a bait flies. I use a slow reel, a 6.3 to 1 reel. I don't use the 7.1 to 1 reels or the speed reels. I from tackle standpoint, I just cannot stand fast reels and swim baits, because these are glide baits. You want to fish them slow. You want to fish them slow. You don't want to overspeed on the reel, and so that's why I use a slow reel. You know, if I'm really fishing slow, I actually go to some of the 5 series reels. You know, the 5.4 to 1, 5.6 to 1s, whatever that might be. But that's what I recommend. And monofilament and fluorocarbon, and definitely not braid.
Let's talk a little bit more about the actual functionality of these baits in deeper water. Now, it's not going to be too long before we get into the time of year where the water gets to be, I can tell you right now that the south end of Lake Washington, which is where I live, water's 54 degrees. It's going to be about 2 weeks before it's lower than 50. So it's going to be colder. So we're talking about significantly cooling temperatures going into December. It'll be Thanksgiving before you know it. So let's talk about this new frontier that was new 10 years ago. It's not necessarily all that new anymore. I mean, people have really started to explore the fact that you can fish these baits in the dead of winter and catch those fish. Let's talk about that a little bit. Tell me a little bit more about your thoughts about the last frontier.
You know, it's deep fishing swim baits, man. I've always been fascinated by it, because I had some friends that were fishing them way back in the late 90s. And like I said, around 2000, 2001, when I won Clear Lake, these guys were at Robert Lee, you know, the king of the Delta back in the day. Him and his dad were going out to Angels Camp and these lakes out there around Angels Camp and fishing 60, 70, 80 foot of water with swim baits. You know, and they were dropping swim baits down there on what they called, you know, dropping them in schools of trout. There was big trout that were real deep, and these bass were on these big schools of trout. And this was all happening to fish a swim bait 60, 70 foot of water. And I've done it at Amistad. And anything less than that too. It's with these baits, with these big glide baits, you're luring fish to come out of real deep water, because you're putting the bait in the strike zone. When you're in 30 foot and the water's clear, a fish sitting in 40, 50 foot of water doesn't have far to go to get himself a big meal. And that's where, if you're throwing a soft plastic bait or a hard bait like the Venom or the Viper, putting as much weight in them as you can, getting them near the bottom, slowing them down, and drawing big bites out, really big bites of big fish that just don't see anything fake down there. They never see artificial baits down there that are able to catch them. You know, all they're used to down there is just what's indigenous in the area, which is real bait fish. You know, real shad or real shiners, real trout, real tilapia. You know, all of them are wintering. So the winter bite and the deep bite is so cool, and it's so key. And a lot of guys don't have the confidence to do it because it's such a hard thing to do. But deep winter fishing for swim baits. I go to these shows now. There's guys ice fishing swim baits. I've met guys that are ice fishing. They drill holes. They drop swim baits through the holes, and they're catching these giant fish swim baits on ice fishing. I mean, that blows my mind, because to the point, it's beyond the dead of winter. They drove out there in their truck, drilled a hole in the ice, dropped a swim bait through the ice, and caught. So cool. I mean, that's as cold as it's going to get, and they're still catching swim bait fish. And when I love going to sports shows, where guys blow my mind about swimbait fishing. And when I get up north to Wisconsin or Michigan or Maine or any of those places, and I'm doing a show, and guys go, "You won't believe how good the swimbait fishing is in the winter up here with a hole in the ice." That just shows you the potential of what's out there.
Is this a case where let's go back to the open water, where you're actually finding fish on your electronics and fishing specifically for individual fish? I mean, if you're talking about like fish hunkered down in kind of deeper water, are you going that far that you can identify, like a specific fish to fish for?
That's a great question. Mine has always been looking for big schools of bait down there. I've never caught. I don't think I've ever really identified a specific one fish on a graph and gone after swimbait ever. And I'll drop a spoon down there. I'll drop something down there, right? Because it's so hard to tactically to get a bait like a swimbait on a single fish, because you'd have to back off, throw, you'd have to sink down. But now I look for big schools of life down there. And looking for those big schools of life, that to Robert Lee's point, where those trout were wintering was where he was dropping big swim baits, on wintering trout, and that kind of stuff is intriguing to me, where if I find bait fish in the winter, in an area or just an area that I know that has the bass kind of hibernate, and I don't want to say hibernate because they're still going to eat, but they winter in a certain area. These guys talk about these lakes. I mean, there's a mine quarry, or there's old rock waterfalls, or these old foundations from when the lake was first built, and these are deep things they know, where there's old house buildings, all that stuff. You find those kind of things, those are key areas, bump a swimbait into them. I mean, I've got some great places at Amistad that are old foundations and old things that were down there, and every time my swimbait bumps into it, I hang on real tight because I'm about to get my arm ripped off. I mean, there's big fish just living around these things. These are big objects. Big deep objects are great for swimbait.
We have a little bit of an interesting guest who just logged on a little bit ago. It's a gentleman by the name of Mike Long. So those of you who don't live on the West Coast might not know exactly who Mike Long is, but I guarantee you that they have seen pictures of fish that he has caught. Mike is, of course, Byron, you can introduce who he is. I mean, he's one of the best big bass fishermen who has ever walked the face of the planet. And he says here, "I always listen when Byron speaks."
Dude, Mike Long is half of the stuff Mike and I have sat there at my house in Vegas and had these conversations over a table together. He has been at the Lake Mead House in Las Vegas, and we have sat there and talked swim baits, him and I, and it's cool because he is as pure and as good and as solid as any guy, like you said, one of the best swim bait fishermen that's ever walked the country, knows big fish as good as anybody that walked the country, and it's so cool to have him on. And Mike and I could probably sit and just entertain ourselves for hours talking about the stuff we're talking about now, the old dinosaur baits. I mean, if he just logged on now, but the old Worm Kings with the galvanized hooks, and all the old stuff. I mean, he knows all this stuff. He knows the history as well, if not better than me. And I'd love to have him on with me because he'd be filling in the gaps of the stuff I can't remember.
That would be.
I've killed a lot of brain cells.
That would be super. That would be super cool. We should probably set that up sometime. We've got a real quick kind of a basics question here from Daniel Byrne. He wants to know direct line tie or at a snap. Direct line tie or a snap.
That's a great question. I always like tying to a split ring. I am not a big fan. Snaps sometimes help the action, and I know all the Japanese. I mean, a lot of the Japanese glide baits come with a snap. There's an argument, and I play with this. And again, there was a guy that asked earlier about this. Depending on the line you're throwing, the fluorocarbon you're throwing versus the monofilament you're throwing, there's so many variables there that worry me sometimes. There's snaps. They catch grass, obviously. If there's anything in the water, they're going to catch it, unless they're really, really, they're really aerodynamic and streamlined. But I don't like snaps because I feel like it's just one more thing to go wrong for me. So I always like to throw split rings. But at the same time, if I see an action actually visually enhanced by a snap, and I feel like that's something I have to go with, I experiment with it. I sometimes see which bait, depending on where I'm throwing it, with the line I'm throwing at, and the place I'm throwing it, if the action is really enhanced with the snap. And snaps, some guys swear by them, and some guys don't like them. I err on the side of going with the split ring, feeling I'm good enough with a split ring, a big heavy-duty split ring. But there's other guys that say you're doing a disservice to a bait if you don't put a snap on it, and more power to them because they got a lot of confidence in whatever snap they might be throwing.
So I want to remind folks here that the conversation, we're almost already done with our hour, but the conversation here can continue if you want to. I mean, basically, if you want to go to the Livingston Facebook page and continue to post these questions, we'll get these in front of Byron. If for some reason we don't get to, and we will not get to a bunch of them because we're just going to run out of time. I do want to deal with this, though. Michael Moore he wants a little more detail on if line size limits the glide distance of these baits, or is it more based on the retrieve speed? Line size or retrieve speed? What are your thoughts on that?
I think retrieve speed is way more important. I think retrieve speed. I've watched so many guys overfish. When I won Clear Lake this last time, I had a lot of help because I let it day to day, wire to wire. I let it, and guys knew I was throwing swim baits. I mean, it was no secret I was going to throw a swim bait at Clear Lake, and everybody had a lot of swim baits. And I had a lot of elite pros that decided to come in and try to help me catch my fish until the cameras showed up. When the TV cameras showed up, it was funny how fast they would leave because they didn't want to be seen on camera really hounding you. But boy, when there were no cameras on you, these guys try to help you catch every fish in your area, so to speak. And I will not say who it was, but the one thing I noticed about those guys is that they fished too fast. They had the rod down, and they were reeling, and they were looking over at you, and they were just coming through, and they knew they were burning through your area, and they were throwing some pretty good swim baits. I would identify what bait they were throwing every time they would cast, as well they would look at mine, because we're all throwing our baits, and the hang time was when they look at your bait real closely, trying to figure out exactly what it was you were throwing, which I thought was funny. But at the same time, once you hit the water, it was what they did at that point, where they put the rod down, they would just start reeling it, you know, like it was a rattle trap. Boy, I'll tell you what, they would all reel it too fast. And I don't think I saw a single guy really catch a fish around me for the 4 days at the Clear Lake event. And that was one of those things where I line size 20, 25 pound fluorocarbon mono, you know, if you can get away with 30, great. But 20 to 25 pound fluorocarbon and mono is fantastic. And I don't think line size is nearly as important as speed. And I noticed here Mike Long asked a question about the feather in front. Did you see that one?
Didn't see that one, but let's jump
into
that there.
I got Mike Long, who's here. Hey, Mike, I want to say hi to Mike because I just wish to God we got to do a show together. I want to invite him to come on live. Please ask him if the line size, okay, that was on there. But Mike asked about this, and this is something cool. Like I said before, I wanted every feature that I've ever seen on a swim bait to be on our baits. So, you know, there was a company a long time ago that had a jointed bait where you could adjust the weight. So we did that. You know, I noticed that it's better to have a bait that doesn't have a static barrel swivel, so the fish can't lever. A lot of guys are adding double split rings so that the fish, when he eats it, doesn't twist himself off the hook. Well, if you add a barrel swivel that spins within the body cavity like ours does, you can see that the fish will never pin himself off because the barrel swivel keeps spinning. But the one thing Mike's asking about is the feather in the front. I like feathers in the front because it looks kind of weird when it's just here, but when it's in the water, it looks like something hanging off the fish. It looks like he might have lost a gill plate, or he might have something wounded down there, and it looks like there's a piece of him that it makes it look more vulnerable. And I don't know who came up with it, if it was a United States thing, but I started seeing it with the Japanese baits. The Japanese baits were coming in very expensive, but they were putting that feather in the front. You can see that feather right there. And I kind of looked at it and thought, well, that's odd, until you put it in the water and you see this kind of just white. It gives it more of a three-dimensional effect. And I know Mike probably knows this, so I love that the legend's asking me this, because he's probably just helping out and setting up because he knows, all right, he doesn't like it. Maybe he doesn't like it. I don't know, but he's the legend, and so he knows as well as anybody what turns a fish on. And I really do believe that extra piece of meat that is created by the look of a feather, again, like that, and the spinning barrel swivels. I mean, that's very few baits have that, but some of them did. And I was like, let's just add every cool thing that there is in hard baits and swim baits to these baits, so that it has all the accoutrements of great swim baits. And we do. I mean, you can have removable tails. You can take that tail out and replace that tail. You can change the color of the tail. You can change the size of the tail. So you can take the bait out, and you can actually change tails. A lot of guys like bigger tails. A lot of guys like smaller tails. And then you can wedge it back in there. So you got these different looks to it. You can add the tail, change the tail. A lot of guys like to flip the tail backwards and forwards. They flip the tail. When I'm fishing it as a topwater bait, take all the weights out of it, I want the pointy long part up so it actually kicks the water. It'll flick the water. So when I'm popping that thing on the surface and it's going back and forth, it actually spits water out of the tail. It's the coolest effect. It's like got a tail kick to it. So it looks like it's trying to get back down when you're popping that thing as a surface bait. So anyway.
Your deal is running out, so we have until midnight tonight in your time zone to get 30% off all the swim baits that Byron's tonight in line at, the V Viper and the V Venom, both in 6 and 8. You get a code at checkout. Basically, it's BV Swim. You get 30% off your baits tonight. That's for the swim baits only, for tonight only until midnight. Best price you'll ever see anywhere. And while you're there surfing around and grab your favorite color of Livingston swim bait and post it on either the YouTube live feed or the Facebook live feed, you can qualify to win a swim bait and a hat as well. Byron, we've got a couple of cleanup questions here before we shut off for the night. But one question here was about the use of swim baits around cover or an open space. I mean, do you have a preference, or is there a reason why you shouldn't fish them around cover?
Man, I'll tell you, I really do like them in both. I feel like around cover, you draw fish out of cover with them. You know, I've seen some incredible times where fish, and this is true around boat docks, especially like commercial docks. If you go around gas docks and marinas, you know, these are big resident fish. And I used to do very well. And a lot of tournaments that I talked about winning in the late 90s, and it's the secret swim bait fish. A lot of those were keyed up on me going near. If I could go to a marina, if I could go to a boat dock, if I could go somewhere and find areas where there were big fish that have lived there and hadn't moved, traditional haunts, you know, and threw a swim bait by there, you're drawing big fish that live under docks that have seen a million boats and a million fishermen, and a swim bait can just draw them out. So cover draws, swim baits draw fish out of cover that have been seeing everything else go by. You know, even at Havasu, this last year we were at Havasu, and Bassmaster went to Havasu. You throw these things around the tulies, there's some giant fish living in those tulies. They're used to boats being around, but they come ripping out of the tulies to attack these swim baits. And it's mind-boggling the power of a big bait to that point. So you don't have to fish them right in the cover. Fishing them near the cover will draw the fish out. And then open water, easy open water applications are what I've made my bread and butter on. That's the traditional way to fish a swim bait, is fish in open water. So the answer is both. I like fishing them where I know big fish live, that I need to draw them out. And I also like fishing them where I would traditionally fish them, which is just open water applications where there's bait getting torn up by big fish.
So to finish off here for tonight, we're going to kind of reverse the field here, and we're going to open it up to you, Byron. Is there anything that we didn't get a chance to look at tonight that you think, especially for this time of year when the water starts and you've got these fall conditions heading into early winters? There, you know, a couple of things that maybe we didn't look at, or one thing we didn't maybe look at, or maybe we covered it all. I don't know. But the field is yours for the final question.
Well, you know, I always say this because everybody that watches my seminars, my swim baits, I always like to tell people that it's the hardest thing to do. I know you've heard me say it a million times, so I'm going to say it again, is at the end of your retrieve, stop the bait. And as hard as that is to do for the whole day, I want every angler out there to imagine that these fish are following this big fish. I mean, they're curious because they've picked up on this thing and they're following it. And as this is getting closer to your boat, those fish are not stupid. They've lived their whole lives in these lakes. They know the sound of your boat. And yes, boats make sound. I mean, there's a sound from the transducer. There's a sound from the trolling motor. There's a presence, and they know that presence is real. They're not dumb. They know they're getting close to that thing, you know, that floats around above them like a UFO most of their life. But it's something they've grown up with. So as this thing is getting closer and closer to the boat, the hardest thing to do, and this is my number one tip for swim bait fishing whenever they ask me, we didn't talk about it tonight, so I'm going to say it now. If you stop that bait before it gets to the boat and make this bait hesitate as if it really is bass, crappie, tilapia, you name it. But if this thing pauses, and not necessarily right at the boat, but about 3 or 4 feet, 5 feet out, 6 feet out, if it just stops dead in its tracks, you'll pick up 30 to 40% of your bites that you would have never gotten. If you reel it all the way to the boat and fire it out there again, you're going to do yourself a disservice, because that bait should have froze. That fish should have stopped. That fish should have hesitated. And that momentary hesitation near your boat is when those fish, the big followers, you won't even see the followers. They'll come out of deep. They might be 3 feet down off to the left, 3 feet down off to the right. They might be 5 feet behind it. You didn't know you had a follower. It's a follower you're never aware of. I say that, and it sounds real easy if all of us sitting here tonight talking on the computer and being on the web talking about this. But you go out and try to do it tomorrow. Try to do this. Because here's what we did. Our whole lives, I mean, Joel, you've done this. Your whole life, when it gets to the end of a cast, ever since we were kids, by the time your cast is over, your eyes look up and you plan your next cast.
Yep.
You know, this is done. Here I go. This is 30, 40 years, 20 years, whatever it is ingrained in your fishing body. Oh, that cast is over. Time to go. I tell you this right now, but if you were fishing with me tomorrow, you'd catch me after 1 or 2 hours probably forgetting to stop it. Or, you know, you could laugh at me, because here I am telling you stop every single cast. I can't do it. I cannot do this. I can't go out fish a whole day and stop every single cast. It's just that after a while, we get into a rhythm. We're thinking about lunch. We're thinking about people back home. We're thinking about our next spot. And we've made the mistake of just picking up and firing. If you stop every cast and you give that big fish a chance to smoke this thing, and everybody that, I hope you at home watching this, whoever you are watching this, so many people come up to me at boat shows, some people email me, some people talk to me, and they say, that one tip you gave me, and they show me pictures. They get their phones out, and they're like, let me show you something. And they take their phone and go, you see that? You see that? That's a 9-pounder. That's a 10-pounder. That's a 12-pounder. That's a 6-pounder. That's my personal best. You know how I caught that personal best? I caught that personal best stopping the bait at the boat. Stopping the bait at the boat. It's a fun bite. It's a fun bite, dude. When an 8-pounder, a 10-pounder, a 12-pounder smokes your bait at the boat, that is a fun bite because you're on a short leash. You got a big dog on a short leash, and it's a lot of fun.
That's good stuff. That's going to finish it up for tonight. So now we actually have a goal for the next time we talk about swim baits. We're gonna reach out to Mike Long. We're going to include him in the swim bait discussion. We're in on that deal. Hey, listen.
Thanks for being on the show. Man.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to say.
We need to extend our thanks to the folks who tuned in and listened. And of course, we have some follow-up questions. Go ahead and take those over to the Livingston Facebook page. Post those on Facebook. You can find out who qualifies to win the prizes we've talked about tonight. A quick reminder: you have until midnight tonight to get 30% off the Bee Viper, the Bee Venom, both the 6 and the 8-inch. Best prices you're going to see anywhere. You'll enter the code BVSWIM when you check out. Byron, thank you for all the information. I can't wait to talk to you again.
Drink your Don Chilada.
You got it. See you guys.
Drink your Don Chilada.